So 6.03 is about protists. So they're different. We talked about some of the different kingdoms, right? So do you remember, what are the three domains of life? What are the three domains?
I think it was plantae, or sorry, no. There was one that was bacteria, and there's archaebacteria, and then there's animalia, right?
Close. There's a third one. The third one includes
Eukarya.
eukaryotes, right? So that
Yeah, so
includes
it's eukarya, archaea, and archaeobacteria. Sorry, eukarya, bacteria, and archaebacteria, right?
right. Now within eukarya, what are the different kingdoms? Do you remember what are the names of the different kingdoms within eukarya?
I remember there was animalia, and then plantae, and then I don't remember the others.
Yeah, so animals, plants, fungi, and protists, right?
Protists,
Yeah.
yes, okay.
So we're going to be talking about protists today. So protists are basically, they're basically considered to be like very, very like simple kinds of creatures. Most protists.
So wait. So brother, before we continue, last class we talked about archaebacteria and bacteria, and we compared them, right?
Right, exactly. Right. So this time we're talking about protists, right?
Okay.
So protists are basically like very simple, generally considered to be like very simple kinds of organisms. So most of them are one cell, unicellular, but some of them are multicellular. So
some of them are unicellular, some of them multicellular.
Yeah. So most of them are unicellular, right? So if you think of a protist,
so like meaning one cell, right? Meaning one cell.
Yeah, one cell. So the vast majority are going to be one cell, right? However, there are some that have multiple cells, all right? So we're going to talk about, what protists are. So this is just giving you like one example of this kind of protist. So most of them you need microscopes to kind of see, right? All right, so let's take a look. So
I'm texting Anas real quick, brother. Hold on.
Okay.
Oh. All right, I texted him. Where are we?
So this right over here, these are some examples of protists. So you can see that most of these are going to be like one cell. Most of these are going to be unicellular. Like this one over here, right? It is composed of like one cell, all right?
Which one?
This one here on the left.
Okay, yeah, the ones on the left. And then the ones on the right are multicellular?
So not all of them. So you look over here on the right. So some of them on the right are one cell, and some of them are multicellular. So for example, do you recognize, on the right over here, do you recognize like anything?
Yeah, I see. I think these are lungs. I don't know. They look like lungs, and then the bottom part is.
Yeah, this one over here looks like lungs, but this is I think this is red algae. Anyone know?
Oh, it's algae.
Red algae.
Oh, this is I know this kelp.
Yeah, kelp, right?
Kelp.
Yeah, it's kelp.
So it forms like the giant kelp forest. So
Anas joined, right? Yeah, Anas joined.
Yes, I did.
So kelp, like when you go out, kayaking, right, and you see like all the like different kinds of algae and stuff like that, right? So a lot of those are, or probably most of those are protists, right? But notice, right, these are all multicellular, right? So so for here we're talking about protists. So most protists are unicellular, but some, like this giant kelp here on the right, is multicellular, right? So the kelp here, they form, giant forests underneath the ocean, basically, right? These can be, sometimes like hundreds of feet tall. The kelp in the forest. All right. So we have, most of these are unicellular, right? Like you see over here on the bottom right, we need like microscopes to kind of see them, right? And then this one on the top right is the kelp forest, right? So the protists, right? This is just giving you some general information. So most protists are unicellular, and they're also eukaryotic, right? So remember, protists are one of the kingdoms in eukarya, right? So archaea and bacteria are the prokaryotes, right? So protists are eukaryotes, right? So protists are usually unicellular eukaryotic organisms, but some of them are multicellular, and some of them grow in colonies. So colonies does not mean multicellular. Anas, what do you think colonies means? Like if I say that
Like groups.
in groups, right? So they're all together. So you might think at the beginning, oh, this is like a multicellular organism, right? But that's not necessarily the case, right? Colonies could also mean that they're still individual, but they're all just kind of grouped together, all right? Like, so for example, bacteria also grow in colonies, right? So bacteria, they might form a colony, but that's not one organism, right? That's just a bunch of organisms just tightly packed together, all right? So protists are unicellular. They could live in colonies or they could be multicellular, right? Now this one over here on the right, right, is something called a paramecium, right? So so this is just like a very common, very famous, example of a protist. So paramecium, you're probably going to hear that, probably see like examples, examples, that's like just like a common example that they always give. So here's a couple pictures over here of paramecium. So this is basically what it looks like.
So they're eukaryotic, right? Like even though they're unicellular, because generally unicellular organisms are prokaryotic, right? Like at least
right.
In bacteria and stuff like that, unicellular.
Right. Bacteria and archaea are right, but protists, these are all
eukaryotic unicellular organisms.
Right. So you can notice in here that there are some membrane-bound organelles that are in here, in the paramecium. Like for example, there's a nucleus, right? So this is definitely going to be eukaryotic, right? So if you see like in the picture a nucleus, that's going to be eukaryotic. And you can see down here.
If you see a nucleus, all right.
Yeah. So there's all different kinds of different vacuoles and different things, organelles, membrane bound things inside of this paramecium. So that means it's definitely eukaryotic, right? So the paramecium, it moves around, right? So on the very outside, Fariha, what do you see that's like kind of covering the very outside of this paramecium? All around the outside, what do you see? Take a look at these pictures. What do you see that's like covering all around the outside?
It's like little strings. I don't know, what do you call it?
Hairs.
So this is called cilia, hairs. So so there's little like hair-like things. They're called cilia. If you look at this picture over here, Cilia, cilia. Did they put two L's? I don't think there's supposed to be two L's. All right, so Cilia, cilia. All right, so they use that for two things. So what do you think they could be using that cilia for? What could be the two things? All right, is Anas here? I guess he got kicked off. All right, Yusuf, what are the two things that the paramecium could be using the cilia for?
To move around and to probably like keep itself safe from like dangerous, I guess, like viruses and stuff, so like they can't invade them as easily.
All right, so movement is one of them. All right, so definitely movement is one of them. I haven't heard of that second one. So Fariha, what do you think? So movement is one reason why it has all this like tiny hairs. If it kind of like moves it around, if you move like a bunch of cilia together, it can use it as like a small paddle to move, right? What is another reason Fariha that it could have the cilia around the edge? Any guesses? Any ideas? Not sure. So
I don't know, honestly.
Another thing is, as it goes around, it senses, there's like a food particle. So it coordinates its cilia to move that food particle like from over here, for example, and then move it all the way here to this
to its food place, its oral groove. All right, I see.
So this is kind of like its mouth, the oral groove. So if it senses something on the outside somewhere else, it can kind of use the cilia to move it around until it gets to its mouth. All right, so something like that. All right, so this is called paramecium, just very common example. So there's basically protists are divided into three different types. You have animal-like, plant-like, and fungus-like. So it's based on like the characteristics of animals, plants, and fungus, right? So animals, right, they eat something else, right? Animals, they go out and they eat, right? So that's called heterotrophic, right? So if a protist, consumes other organisms, then we're going to call it animal-like. Does that make sense? All right. So if it's plant-like, Fariha, why do you think it's called plant-like?
Brother, can you just repeat what you said? Your thing lagged.
Okay. Yeah. So animal like. So each of these has a characteristic of what it's like. So animal like means that it eats food. Like an animal, it eats. It goes and consumes.
Oh, okay, okay. And
Right.
then autotrophic means that they produce their own food, like from sunlight, like sort of like plant cells.
Right. So
And
plant
then
like.
fungus like protists are also heterotrophic. I see.
Right. Right. So plant like they make their own food. Right. So
Mm.
fungus like. So fungus like they also consume other organisms. But Anas, what do you think is kind of usually the difference between animal-like and fungus-like? What do you think? They're both consuming other things, right? Neither of them are making their own food from sunlight. But what's kind of the difference? Why are these different?
Um, pro- because you said fungus like absorbs.
They absorb, right? So an animal-like usually kind of eats, um, right? So animal-like usually kind of like swallows their food, right? An animal has like usually has internal digestion, right?
Mm.
So there's some like weird exceptions and stuff like that from like sea creatures, I think, but they kind of swallow like a food, go and eat something, and then take it in. Fungus like usually they're decomposers. So they see something dead, they put the enzymes outside of itself. So a fungus a fungus that's growing on something that's dead, it doesn't have a stomach, right? So the fungus doesn't have a stomach, right? It takes the just like a person has a digestive enzyme inside the stomach. The fungus takes its digestive enzyme and throws it out onto the thing, and then once it's digested outside, it takes up the nutrients. Does that kind of make sense? So that's kind of the difference: animal-like versus fungus-like. All right.
Fungus like don't they don't have a stomach to digest it. They kind of just like consume it.
Right. They sort of digest it outside and then just take up the simple nutrients once it's all broken down.
Oh, okay, okay. And then animal like they digest. I mean, they consume it and then they digest it and then take the
Right.
nutrients inside.
Right.
I see.
So protists, they all have these kinds of similarities. So these are, so we've talked about some of these things before. They're very simple, right? Prokaryotes are very simple compared to like animals and plants. So even though it's animal-like, plant-like, it's not as complex as those things are. Usually unicellular, but like occasionally multicellular. Eukaryotic, right? They're all eukaryotic. Lack specialization within the cells. Anyone know what that means? What do you think? Anyone have any ideas? Lack specialization within the cells. What does that mean?
Lack.
Special. Oh, because like not every like if they're multicellular, for example, not every cell has a different different jobs or whatever. They're not specialized in anything, I guess.
Right. Freya, what were you saying?
Yeah, something.
Right. So.
Like the different cells have different tasks.
So for example, we would say that human beings have specialized cells, right? What does that mean? If we say that,
Like each of its cell does something or
does something different, right? So in a human being, right, there's like brain cells, kidney cells, skin cells, right? Cells are specialized and they do only like one kind of thing, right? A skin cell is specialized for like protection and stuff like that. It doesn't do the same job as like a liver cell. But in a protist, right, every cell, especially because they're unicellular most of the time, every cell has to kind of take care of most kinds of things, right? It has to provide a little bit of protection, a little bit of digestion, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, right? So it's not like different cells are doing different things. All the cells are kind of doing the same kind of thing. Okay. Most have mitochondria, right? They can reproduce asexually or sexually. So some of them they just bud off and produce two new organisms. Others need like a male and female gamete. Many are parasites. So often many of the common parasites that you have probably heard of, they are oftentimes protists. All right.
Oh, okay.
All prefer aquatic or moist environments. That's because if you have just one cell, right, that cell to go find food and stuff like that, it needs to be able to live in a moist environment to travel with the water. If it's on land somewhere, right, it's just going to dry up and just die, right? So they all live in some kind of water-like environment. Go down. This is kind of the same kind of thing. General characteristics of protists. All are eukaryotes that cannot be. So they're all eukaryotes, but they don't fit into specifically plant, animal, or fungus. Right. Some are multicellular. Most Most are unicellular. Right. And this is just kind of showing the same thing again in a different way. So you have fungus-like, right? That means they're decomposers, right? And these are some examples we're going to look at later. So these are decomposers. So if you see like, oh, there's like a dead fish or something, and like protists are covering it and eating it up, that's probably a fungus-like protist. Plant-like, you're going to see a lot of chloroplasts and chlorophyll. They're going to be green. Animal-like, you're going to see like an oral groove, somewhere where the food comes in and they're going to eat it. Right? So if you see an organism, it has like an oral groove, that probably means it's an animal-like protist because it's going to be eating something, right? Like the paramecium we talked about, right? All right.
Molds are protists, or not all? Not all of them, but like a lot of them are, right?
Which one?
A lot of the molds of protists. I mean, a lot of molds are like protists, right?
Yes. So there's something called slime mold specifically. I think molds, sometimes people just refer to molds like in general terms. It could be like a fungus or it could be anything. But there's something specifically called a slime mold. So we're gonna take a picture of that later. So yeah, if someone says mold, I think usually people refer to that as like a fungus, like mold growing on bread or something like that.
Yeah, but like molds are always protists, or not always?
No. So well, it depends on what kind of mold. If it's called a slime mold, then that's always a protist.
Okay, I see.
But if someone just talks about molds in general, that can be many different things. That's kind of like a general term.
Okay.
So here we have animal-like protists, right? So animal-like protists, right? They are often mobile because they have to go chase after food and go grab different kinds of things, right? So, for example, in this one, this protist has some kind of string-like thing, around the back. Anyone know what that is called? Like that string-like thing that helps it to move?
We talked about it in the last class. I forgot what it's called. I don't remember what it's called.
Flagella, right? So flagella, right? So it whips it around and moves around. There are some that also have cilia as well. We looked at cilia on the paramecium, right? So they move through their medium, right? This word medium just means kind of like the environment that they're kind of living in, all right? So whatever environment they're kind of living in, that's called medium. So they are heterotrophic. Remember, they're eating food, right? So we're going to look at some couple different ways in which they consume food. We're going to take a look at least one picture over here. So this right here is called endocytosis, and there's something similar called pinocytosis. So what is endocyte? So the word the prefix endo means like inside, right? So always think about that. That's the way to break it down. Endo means inside. Exo means outside.
Oh, wait. Right now we're talking about animal-like protists, right?
Right. Animal-like, right?
Okay.
So endocytosis means that this organism is like taking things in like this. You see how this organism is taking things in, right? Food particles is taking it in order to digest it, right? So that's called endocytosis. This word right here at the top, right? It says they can consume their food using endocytosis or pinocytosis. So in both of these processes, the cell membrane kind of folds in and takes substances in from the outside, all right? So these, circles are called food vacuoles, and then they use their digestive enzymes inside in order to break everything down. So they're taking this inside, right? They're taking the food inside, and then this, food vacuole is going to be fused with some other small circle that is full of digestive enzymes. And when they
This happens in the food groove, right? Like where the food, where the mouth is, sort of.
Right. So I believe this usually happens in the food groove, but I think this process, endocytosis, is like a general term. It could happen like anywhere on the cell.
Okay.
But usually for animal-like protists, it probably happens in the oral groove area.
The oral groove area, right? So like they consume it, and then it's like kind of carried in a vacuole or a vesicle, and then it goes to like the digestive area.
Right.
Right.
So this right over here, right? shows that, animal-like protists, they move in different ways, all right? So we're going to take a look at each one of these examples through like a picture, right? So this over here, right, this is called Trypanosoma brucei. It causes some disease. What was the disease? African sleeping sickness, all right? So if you heard of sleeping sickness, probably some kind of fly, I think it's called like the tsetse fly or something like that. If it's infected with this and then it bites you, then it could take this protist parasite and put it inside of your blood. So this is on the right over here. This is like a example from like a blood sample. You see all these little like round blood cells, and this parasite is in here. And so, if this person presents with this sickness, they look at it under the microscope, and if they see this, they say, "Oh, this is what it is," right? So this
is a parasite.
This is a parasite, right? It causes this sickness. So
is this unicellular or multicellular? Like, do you know?
This is one cell, unicellular.
Okay.
So you notice over here in this cartoon picture, you see the nucleus?
Yep.
Yes.
Right? So this is one cell. This whole thing is one cell. And it moves around. It swims through the blood with this flagella. All right? So the main idea here is just that some protists, they move with flagella. Animal-like protists, they move with flagella. Right? This is another thing also, right? These are other protists that use flagellum. You see this through a light microscope, right? See the flagella over here? So another thing, I think we talked about microscopes before, right? So you notice that this is kind of reaching the end of its. So let's suppose. Okay, we were talking about light microscopes. I think it was last semester, right? In the beginning, different kinds of microscopes. So you notice that we've zoomed in. It says here 600 times, right? It says here X 600.
Yeah.
So you can notice that already it's starting to become a little bit blurry, right? That these are not
a little
really,
bit, yeah.
These are not really like focused too well. So do you think that we could really zoom in more to like 2,000, 3,000 and really see this in like super detail with a light microscope?
No. You would
Probably
need
not,
to have
right?
an electron microscope for that.
Electron microscope, right? Exactly, right. So this is just kind of an example like how there's like a limit to the light microscope, right? I forgot what the number they gave last over there was. Maybe it was like 1,500 times or something. But beyond that, it's really you're not going to be able to see the detail. It's just going to become blurry. All right. So this is another way. So we talked about flagella. That's one way that things can move. The animal protists can move. This over here is an amoeba. All right. So amoebas, they also cause some kind of illnesses. Sometimes you have to watch out for them in the water and stuff like that. So they move through this thing called pseudopodia. All right. So what they do is they kind of extend part of their membrane out, right, in the direction they want to move, and they push their cytoplasm through into that pseudopodia, and then that pseudopodia becomes bigger and bigger, and then where the amoeba used to be becomes smaller and smaller, and so eventually the amoeba kind of moves where the pseudopodia are.
What is an amoeba? Amoeba is also a protist?
Yeah, it's also animal-like protist.
Okay.
So take a look at this picture here at the bottom. So A, B, C, D, E. It's showing you step by step how the pseudopodia, helps the amoeba to move. So A, the amoeba is here and it senses, oh, there's some kind of prey here. So the amoeba, pushes like the pseudopodia. It forces this small, in the beginning, small pseudopodia over here. And then it also pushes another pseudopodia here on the bottom where C is. And eventually what it does is, the rest of the amoeba kind of contracts and pushes all of its material, all of its cytoplasm and everything that's in it into the area where the pseudopodia is. And so the area here to the left becomes smaller and smaller, and the area here where the pseudopodia are becomes bigger and bigger, and eventually the amoeba is now in a different area. All right. Does this picture kind of make sense? Friha, do you understand what's going on in this picture?
This line thing that's coming out is called a pseudopodia, and then the prey sort of goes under it,
Right.
and then
I get your ass.
it opens like a food cup, and then it goes inside, and basically it's eaten, right? The prey is eaten.
Right. So it's basically like kind of trying to surround something. So on both sides, it sends out pseudopodia. And
So
then
that the
it
thing couldn't
surrounds it.
escape, really.
Right.
Okay. I see.
Right. Exactly. Right. So it takes it in and it digests it inside. Right. So this is another way that an animal-like protist can move. Right? Now this over here, these are all ciliates. Right? Do you notice here in this photograph over here, there's like a lot of cilia and stuff like that? So this probably over here, I think this probably over here, this microscope on the right, is probably like a better quality because this is still, zoomed in and still pretty good quality. But there is eventually going to be a limit. But apparently this guy is using like some really good lenses or something. I don't know what's different about it specifically. People use different kinds of like objective lenses. You know the things that you flip around at the bottom? So there's like different quality ones. So maybe this person is using like a really like the best quality, right? So, but basically all of these, you can see especially in here, it has cilia all around it. So it can use this to move. So this is one way the animal-like protist can move. Right? So those are three things: flagella, pseudopodia, and cilia. Right? So plant-like protists, obviously they make their own food. They're going to be very green. Right? So all of these down here are green. Now some of them have other pigments. You see this red algae down here at the bottom left?
Yes.
Right? This is red, right? It's not green. But the chlorophyll is there, but there's also, just like a flower, just like some plants have a lot of some other pigment and it covers up the green color. But the green is still there, okay? The chlorophyll is still there, it's hidden, right? Now, make sure you know the word autotrophic, right? Autotrophic means it makes its own food, right? So they could ask you something like this thing is autotrophic, so what could it be? Autotrophic means it makes its own food, right? So, so these are just like some different, examples of plant-like protists. And it says here they play an important part of aquatic food chains, right? Because just like on land, right, an animal, a creature comes in and eats a plant first, then something else eats that animal, then something else eats that animal. You guys have seen the food chain before, right? So same thing in the ocean. These different kinds of plant-like protists, they're often called phytoplankton. They capture energy from the sun, make their own food, and grow. And then other animal-like protists come and eat them. And then other larger things come and eat that, and so on. And eventually, it gets to like fish and sharks and whales, right? So all of the energy for those creatures eventually comes from plant-like protists in the ocean, right? Among other things, right? I'm not saying that's the only thing, but this is like one thing. All right. So these are some different examples. I think so. I don't know how much detail they're going to ask you, like to know each of the names and stuff like that. You might have to just sit down and memorize these names, right? So I just put some example pictures for each one of these. So let's take a look at the first one, chlorophylla. All right, example is green algae. So this right here is an example of green algae. So if you see algae and it's green, like it's bright green like this, it's probably green algae. The other kinds of algae are going to be like brownish. You'll see like it'll look like, oh, this is like green mixed with red and stuff like that, right? You'll see different colors. But if you see something like right, so this is a protist, right? So this is
all types of algae is a protist.
Yes, I think all types of algae are protists, right? Chrysophyta. I'll look that up. I'm pretty sure like anything that's called algae is protist, because I don't think I've ever heard anything different from these ones. So I'm pretty sure they're all classified as protists. Right?
So these are all plant-like protists?
Correct. Right. All of these are plant-like protists. Correct.
Okay.
All right. Next one is Chrysophyta. That's called. So these are diatoms, or I think it's called brown. What was it called? Golden brown algae. So this one here on the left, these are called diatoms. So you may have seen something like this, right? These geometric shapes and stuff like that. Does anyone know what these diatoms are made of?
No.
like that gives it this nice structure like this, the geometric pattern. So it's actually made of silica. Anyone know what silica is? Silica. So silica is like sand. So these things are basically kind of like made of glass. You can think of it that way, right? Like people take sand and they turn it into glass. So these diatoms, their shells are actually made of glass. So that's why it gives it this nice geometric pattern and stuff like that. right? And then this over here is the golden brown algae over here in the bottom right, right? See, the next one is pyrophyia. So these are dinoflagellates. So these ones over here, right, are called dinoflagellates, right? So if you see something like this, right, that looks like these horned kind of things, these are all dinoflagellates. All right, so Freeha, which one of these is the light microscope picture and which is the electron microscope picture?
Is the black one light microscope?
Yusuf, what do you think? Which one is the light microscope
Yusuf's
one?
not here.
Oh, okay. How about Anas? Which one is the light microscope one?
Top left.
Top left, right? So Freya, you notice this one over here, this looks like they're passing light through the slide, right? And it's kind of blurry. You see how that, like, as you zoom in, it's like it's not, it's not going to be as good quality. So you see this one in the bottom right, you see how good quality and detail this is? Right? So you're not going to get this with a regular light microscope. The regular microscope that you use, you have to use the electron microscope for this. All right? So these are dinoflagellates. All right? So the next one is called euglenophyta. All right? So these are two flagellated protists. All right? So let's go back up. So Anas, what do you think this means? Right? It says here euglenophyta, and it says two flagellated protists. What does that mean?
Two flagellated. What does?
Right? So two flagellated.
Oh, it'd be like. Oh. Okay.
It's like two of those strings.
Right. So these ones have double flagella. Okay. So these ones are going to have double flagella. So most time you see flagella, remember we looked at some other examples, there's like one big flagella,
Yeah.
right? So these
Yeah.
ones are going to have double. So these are called euglena.
Okay.
So euglena, they're going to have double flagella, all right? All right, the next one is rhodophyta, all right? Red algae, all right? So the next one is rhodophyta, red algae. So this one still has chlorophyll, but it has other red pigments in it as well, all right? And you might see this, like maybe if someone is on the water, they might see this like floating around and stuff like that. So this is all red algae. And then over here you have brown algae. All right. So probably if you
That
go
looks more like kelp. Like brown kelp.
yeah, so I think kelp is a type of brown algae. That's correct. All right. So kelp. So there's different kinds of kelp. So they're called brown algae, and there's other kinds of things like sargassum. If you've ever like over here in the Atlantic Ocean, there's like all kinds of brown algae floating around. A lot of that is this thing called sargassum. All right. So this yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is seaweed a protist?
Yeah, so most of these are called seaweed. I don't know if seaweed is I'm not sure if seaweed is a scientific term. But yeah, seaweed usually refers to algae, like this, like brown algae, red algae. So I'm pretty sure, I don't think that's a scientific term. I think it's a general term. I'm not sure, 100%. But I think I've always seen it referred to things like this. So I would say right now, yes, that is basically the same thing. All right. So again, all these are protists, right? So you may. So I don't know how much they're going to ask you. You may have to, if they're going to ask you to memorize the names, but these are some examples, just to help you remember them, right? All right. So now you've heard of something called red tide, right? So this picture at the bottom, right? Like the water turns red and stuff like that, right? So what happens is that maybe like some kind of nutrients, right? Maybe there's like fertilizer runoff or something, right? So fertilizer helps things to grow, right? Has like filled with nutrients, right? Whatever it is, nitrogen, phosphorus, stuff like that. So maybe if somebody gets into the water, well, all of a sudden, some of these plant-like protists might, suddenly start using it. They might say, hey, there's a whole bunch of nutrition now. They're going to start growing like crazy. And so this is called an algal bloom, right? It says here algae bloom. That means that just like suddenly the amount of algae suddenly, goes up tremendously, right? More than is normal. And so some of them, they have red colors, they have different colors, and so that's why they call it red tide, all right? So it says here that they don't always, so not all of them are red. So you could have like what's called a red tide without having like the water actually be red, right? Because maybe those specific algae that bloom, don't have a red color, something like that. But a lot of these organisms, right, they release harmful toxins that paralyze fish and cause dead fish to wash up on beaches. So if you have too much of this in the water, they produce toxins that kill off a lot of fish. And it could even be harmful to human beings sometimes.
Sorry, brother.
Okay.
I'm in a third world country, so the power just went out.
Okay, no problem. So we were talking about. So we finished up this one over here. This is called
Wait.
Euglena.
Did I miss anything important?
We just went over the last 3 slides. So this one here is called Euglena.
Mm-hmm.
It has 2 flagella, not 1, 2.
Okay. Oh, okay.
This one's called red algae,
Mm-hmm.
and this is called brown algae.
Okay.
And so kelp is a kind of brown algae.
So algae is multicellular protists, right?
I think not. I think algae not always. I think it could refer to unicellular or multicellular.
But it's a bunch of protists, right, together?
It could be. I think sometimes even if you have unicellular protists, they can be referred to as algae.
Oh, okay.
Right. So this is red tide. So this is like an algal bloom, like some kind of algae suddenly gets out of control, starts growing like crazy for some reason. Maybe like some nutrition comes from somewhere, like fertilizer runoff or something. And so, if it's like a red color, the water becomes red, right? And a lot of these red tides, they produce toxins, and so that's why when there's a red tide, sometimes like they say that a lot of dead fish wash up on the shore because it kills off a lot of the fish and stuff like that.
Yeah, and you're also not like allowed to going to the beach and stuff is banned.
Right.
I think it happened like a year ago or something. I remember. Red tide.
All right, so we have fungus-like protists, right? So these ones are obviously going to kind of decompose, dead organisms in a similar way to fungi, all right? So here are some key characteristics. So similar to fungi, they often produce spores, so they don't need like a male and female gamete, right? So gametes means like male and female. If you see the word spore, that means like not male and female. Just one spore by itself, without going and combining with something else, can produce like another full organism, right? So they have cell walls made from cellulose or chitin, okay? So cellulose is actually the cell wall of plants, okay? Chitin is the cell wall of fungus, right? So these ones, they could have either one of these. Cellulose, which is normally found in like plant cells. You remember we talked about animal versus plant cells? Or chitin. So chitin is, the cell wall of fungi. So fungus-like protists also can be made of chitins. And they behave like fungi, so they release digestive enzymes onto the material and then they just absorb the simple nutrients once everything is digested outside, right? And they're decomposers, right? So pretty much like just describing, like fungi in general, right? So these are the two kinds. These are 2 kinds of fungus-like protists. So you just have to know these names. So this is called slime mold, not just mold, slime mold. And then this is called mildew, all right? So this thing over here called slime mold, let me show you another picture, right? This over here on the left is called a slime mold. So it looks like this. Looks like this like giant covering.
It looks like a sponge.
Yeah, it looks kind of like a sponge or something that covers it. So if you see the picture like this is slime mold, right? On the right, you see mildew. So they look, very, very different, right? So on the right, this is called mildew. So mildews, right? They can, you'll see them like in buildings and stuff like that. You often see like, oh, there's like mildew and stuff like that. And so they can decompose all kinds of different things. So, it says here that they're often in buildings with poor moisture control.
So the thing on, how you've seen that stuff on like AC vents?
Yeah.
That yellow stuff, is that like mildew or something too?
Yeah, so that's probably mildew.
Or that's mold or mildew or something, because it's like
it's
huge yellow, just like a bunch of yellow stuff.
Yeah, so it's usually something like that, right?
Yeah.
So all of these protists, remember we said that protists, they need a aquatic environment or a moist environment. So when something is not draining properly and stuff like that, that's where these happen. So that's why often in the AC vents, that's what happens. All right. All right. So I think that's pretty much it for this one. That's pretty much it for this one. So we talked about. Let me go back to the beginning real quick. To home. All right. So we talked about protists. All right. Here are like different kinds of protists, right? Most are unicellular, some are multicellular. Right? Kingdom. So protist is a kingdom, right? Protist is a kingdom. It's under the kingdom. It's under the domain Eukarya, right? And this one over here is called a paramecium, very common one, right? So it has cilia around the outside, used for movement and for moving food to its oral groove, right? And then there's three different kinds: animal-like, plant-like, and fungus-like, right? So protists are very simple, right? Very simple. They don't have specialized cells like a human being has kidney and liver and all this. They don't have that. All the cells are pretty much similar, right? Showing the same kind of thing. Fungus-like protists, they're decomposers. They have cell walls made of cellulose or chitin, right? Plant-like protists, right? They undergo photosynthesis. Animal-like, right? They move around and they eat other things. Mm-hmm. Animal-like, they move around, right? And they're mobile, right? So they basically ingest their food. They take their food, right? Endocytosis, right? Endocytosis, they take in their food and they digest it inside, right? Like animals, right? They move around using three different ways, right? One is flagella, like this parasite, all right? Right? Again, showing flagella, right?
Brother, I have a question. So, if animal-like protists move around, and so do fungus-like protists, right? Fungus-like protists also move around, right?
I believe so. I think they also can move around.
But plant-like protists do not move around, right?
I think some of them also do move around, but I think it's not as common. A lot of them, they just drift around and do not move. But I believe that some of them also have like flagella and stuff like that.
But animal-like protists can move around, right? They can eat, they can move around.
Right. Animal-like protists have to move around. Right?
Okay, I see.
So this is pseudopodia, right? Amoebas use pseudopodia to move around, all right? And then we have cilia. So cilia are basically, much smaller than flagella, right? If a organism has cilia, they usually have like surrounding it, the whole cell. So they have like a lot of cilia, right? You have plant-like protists. They make their own food, all right? So there's these different kinds of groups, all right? So this right here is green algae, all right? So green algae is like macroscopic. You can see it, all right? These over here, these are called diatoms on the left, and I think golden brown algae on the right. Some of the diatoms are made of like basically kind of like glass shells, right? This is called dinoflagellates, right? Dinoflagellates. This right over here is called euglena, right? So these ones over here, euglena, they have two flagella, not one. This over here is called red algae, and this is called brown algae. So brown algae include like kelp. So if you think of kelp as brown algae. Right? Here we have a red tide. So this happens when like there's like a lot of nutrients in the water, and suddenly some of these algae just grow out of control, and they can be harmful to fish and release toxins. And then you have fungus-like protists, right? They digest things outside, and they kind of suck in the nutrients once it's all digested. And there's two kinds: slime mold and mildews, right? So you have over here slime mold on the left, and then mildew on the right. These are fungus-like protists, all right? All right, any questions on any of those topics?